I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have no special guest. He is a lawyer by profession, and of course, an award winning author, no other than Mr. Andy Semotiuk. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Andy, and can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Very happy to be with you here tonight. Very excited. Looking forward to it. So, a little bit about myself. As you mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I'm located in Toronto. I work with a law firm called Pace Law Firm. I grew up in Canada, in Western Canada, in a place called Edmonton, Alberta. I spent half my life in Canada and the other half of my life in the United States as I went to high school, for example, in Los Angeles. I was raised by a mother. My father died when I was 9 years old, so my mother raised me. And she also had the help of her sister, Helen, who was in Los Angeles, my aunt. So I traveled back and forth, and that's how I grew up. I later wrote the bar exams, became a lawyer, studied law, and wrote the bar exams. And I'm a member of the New York and California bars in the United States, and Ontario and BC in Canada. But I think something that might be more interesting to you is I'm also an author. I've written 4 books and published another one, so 5 published books. And I'm also a journalist. I write for Forbes on immigration. I've been writing articles for them for 10 years. I'm a former United Nations correspondent as well. I was stationed in New York and I wrote about international affairs at the United Nations back in the day. So that's a little bit about me.
Congratulations, Mr. Andy, for sharing your talents to the world. So, what inspired you to become an author?
Well, I had a deep, burning desire inside my heart. I would describe it as an aching need to tell the world some stories that were important to me in my life. It was part of my journey to be here. I believe all of us, when we come onto this earth, are faced with 2 important questions. One is, who am I? And the other is, why am I here? Now, those are philosophical questions, and everybody pretty much has to address them sooner or later in their life. And in my case, the answers to those questions resulted in writing books. For example, my book Solomea, which is something I want to tell you about, and other books that I've written that I've already mentioned.
So, can you tell us the writing process of Solomea?
Sure. Uh, the story begins when I was still a small guy. I was in grade 3, and I came home one day for lunch. And my mother was serving lunch at the kitchen table, and she came in with the mail. And in the mail, there was a letter. And she opened the letter, she read it, and she said to me, Teta Solomea has died. That was Ukrainian, because we were Ukrainian in background, for saying, Aunt Helen has died. Now, I'm talking about Aunt Helen being the opera star Solomea Krushelnytska, who lived in Europe and rose from obscurity to fame in the world of opera. And the letter that my mother was reading came from Aunt Helen, a different Aunt Helen, her sister from Los Angeles. And that was about 1958. But we had not learned about Aunt Helen, the opera star, for some 4 or 5 years after her death. She died behind the Iron Curtain in Ukraine in 1952. But her story began much earlier. In fact, last year, it was the 150th anniversary of her birth. And I'd like to share a little bit about her her story and about the book in this podcast with you now. So her life began on a village in Western Ukraine back in the Austro-Hungarian Empire before, well, in the 1890s, actually. She was born in 1872. And being on a small village farm, it was a large family, 8 children. And as she was growing up, her father asked her, well, what do you want to do with your life? And she said, I love to sing. I would like to sing. So the father said, well, if you're going to sing, you're going to have to go to school, music school. And he sent her to Lviv Opera School, a school for singers in Lviv, which was Western Ukraine. Today it's in Western Ukraine. Back then it was part of Poland, and she learned to sing there. And then from there, she made her way to Milan after a pretty prominent opera star came to hear her sing one day on stage in Lviv. The opera star was named Bellincioni. And when she heard her sing afterwards, she spoke to Solomea and she said, you have a nice voice, you're a good singer, but you need to study more. And to study more, you're going to have to go to where in the world opera is the strongest, the place where opera is really happening, and that's in Milan, in Italy. But this family did not have a great amount of money and wealth to send one of 8 children off to Milan. But the father took a gamble and he said, okay, I'm going to put some money on this child. I'm going to promote this child because she has promise. And so he managed to collect enough money to send her to study opera in Milan. She was, in fact, through Bellincioni's help, assigned to one of the best opera teachers in Milan, a lady named Fausta Crespi. And so she studied opera there. But like anybody who wants to make it big in the world, no matter what field you were talking about, and by the way, I should say, just because this book is written about an opera star doesn't mean that if perhaps some of your listeners are not into opera or perhaps music, doesn't mean the book is not for them. No, on the contrary, the book is probably and could be very helpful for them because it's not a book about opera or a singer. It's a book about achieving the highest that you can achieve as a person in your life and in your calling. It's about a book about finding your true self. That, what I talked about earlier, the burning need inside you, the thing that drives you, the answer to the question, why am I here? Her answer, Solomea's answer, was to sing because she loved to sing. And opera was the chosen road that she took to reach the heights that we're going to talk about. So anyway, she was in Milan singing with a professor that was teaching her. But like anybody else, she needed a break to make it up into the heights of her occupation. And that break came in Milan in what I might describe as off-Broadway. Today, if you want to make it in the world of musical, theater, a great place to be is on Broadway. But perhaps you can't start on Broadway. You have to start somewhere else. But a good place to be found or discovered is off-Broadway, the productions that are produced off-Broadway that ultimately can open the door for you to get onto Broadway and to become the star. Back in her days, which was in the late 80s and coming into the 90s, the off-Broadway of opera was not La Scala, the biggest theater and most prominent opera theater in the world in Milan, but the off-Broadway type theaters in Milan that composers used to try out their new compositions. And one such composition was an opera by a man named Giacomo Puccini. Puccini at that time was one of the big composers of operas in the world. Just at the time when they first met, he was rising to fame. He had not yet hit his fame and his prominence. But he had written an opera called Madame Lescaut, and he was looking for someone to sing the role of Manon. And he was performing it off Broadway, so to speak. He was recruiting for singers. And Fausta Crespi suggested to Solomea, hey, listen, you need some money. I know you're short on money. Try and find a role for yourself in the sort of off La Scala, off Broadway theaters. Maybe someone will pick you up to sing. So she tried, and she auditioned for the role, and she got it. And after she got it, one day while she was rehearsing for the run, this man, this Giacomo Puccini, showed up. Now, she didn't know who he was because he wasn't the one that had rehearsed or auditioned people for the roles and so on. That was someone else. But he showed up, and after her rehearsal, he came up to her and he said, are you ready now to do some work? And she said, work? What work? And he says, well, we're going to work to get you ready for your performance. And she said, well, I'm already rehearsing and working. I'm getting ready for the performance. And he says, no. I mean, really get you prepared to work with you, to have someone work with you to make it as best as possible for you to perform. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he says, well, I have someone that I want you to work with. I'm Giacomo Puccini. I'm the composer of this opera. I want you to work with my appointed director who will teach you how to sing better. And that's how her career started. She started working with this appointed individual that Puccini had selected to teach her how to sing. And she was a success at that opera, and that started her lifelong friendship with Giacomo Puccini, one of the world's greatest opera composers.
So, Mr. Andy, what challenges have you faced in writing Solomea?
Okay. The challenges were these. From that moment when I told you about learning about her, that was the first time I ever heard about her. Later, I did not know, and my family didn't exactly tell me everything about her. I had to learn about her life. And I learned about her life through stories from the family who knew her, people who lived with her, and from books that I was given when I visited Ukraine by people who were intensely interested in her career. And I read the books, but I did not know then, in those days when I traveled to Ukraine, I traveled several times, that I would be writing her biography. It was over time, and especially because of the great interest that my mother had in her career, and my mother's desire to teach my children and me about Solomea's life, that one day I realized, oh, this is not just some legend in Ukrainian circles. This is someone who rose to the very top of her career. And I really need to pay more attention to this. And I decided then I would write the book that I've been talking about.
So, how did you handle writer's block when you writing Solomea?
Well, I can't say that I suffered great writer's block. I think the way to get over writer's block is simply to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And why is it important to me? And I believe if you answer those questions, you should be able to find the route to where you're going. In my case, there were moments when I was writing and I thought maybe, okay, I've reached a point where I can publish the book, but it needed more editing. And the book that we're talking about has been edited multiple times. Just to give you an example, there were over 100 people who contributed to the book. I had free access to a museum dedicated to Solomea Krushelnytska, the opera star. They opened, a number of women who worked there opened that museum to me and said, you can take anything you want from here to write the book, including all the books, literature, articles, etc. My wife edited this book 15 times. She read the book 15 times to get all the corrections that were needed to get the story right the way it should be, right? The way it should be. So it took 10 years to write the book. And, along the way, a lot of changes, a lot of corrections. There's some sad moments where things weren't going the way maybe they should or whatever. But in the end, it came out and we published it.
What authors or books have influenced your writing?
Other authors, you're asking?
Yes.
Okay. Well, one author that I have been influenced by is Victor Hugo. Not long ago, I just finished writing or reading his book, Les Miserables, which is a fantastic book in case if you're looking for a good read, that's a really great read. I'm not someone who reads a lot of novels. I do read novels, but mainly I read biographies. That's my personal interest. Among authors, Ayn Rand was the author that I enjoyed a lot. I mean, there are so many that you could mention. Not long ago, I read a book about just a house. Now, I can't remember the name right off the top of my head just at the moment, but the author wrote about a house that a family grew up in and the importance of this house in terms of the family history. Those are some sort of novel type books that I've been influenced by. On the biography side, I've read a tremendous number of biographies, political biographies like about Kissinger, Biden, Trump, Carter, Ford, you name it. Biographies on people like all the celebrities in Hollywood. So one person that struck me in particular was a guy named Art Linkletter, who was a celebrity in Hollywood. And there's one story that I can tell from reading his book. And it's a story about one day Walt Disney contacted this Art Linkletter. Now, Linkletter was a popular television star. He had a talk show that he had every afternoon on television. And Walt Disney called him one day and said, would you come out with me to Orange County? I'd like you to take a look at something. He said, sure. So they drove down together to Orange County in California. And when they got there, Walt took Art out into an orange field where there were orange trees. And he then told Art about a vision that he had for himself. And the vision was that one day he would create a place called Disneyland. And he told Art about the various parts of Disneyland. He said, over here is going to be Frontierland, and you're going to have, boats on a river that you can go down and crocodiles. And over here is Fantasyland, and you're going to have a castle, and over here is Futureland, and so on. But there was nothing there. It was just orange trees. And Art Linkletter says he tells a story about at the end of his description of what Disney wants to build, he goes to Art, will you invest with me in this project? And Art thought about it. He says, No, later he described, he missed a fortune if he'd only invested with Disney back then. That's a cute story
Definitely.
from.
Very well said, Mr. Andy. Very well said and inspiring. So, what advice do you have for aspiring writers out there?
Well, I would say if you're looking for something to write about, look inside your own life. Check out what your life is all about. Ask yourself the question, why am I here? What is important to me? What's aching inside my heart to get out into the world? I believe everybody has some message inside them that they want to share with other people, some advice that they would give about life, their life, and how they lived it. I think all of us, every one of us, has unique experiences to draw on, to share with other people. You and I, for example, Daniel, you were born somewhere else than I was, where I was born. You had a different school, a different lifestyle, different culture, different interests than I do. And the interesting part is for us to share with each other our lives. We're here to have a story to tell, to have a point of view. That's, I believe, why we are here on earth, is to share each other's lives and to contribute to each other's lives in some positive way, to make a difference for each other. So, for example, there's a philosophy, there's a guy named Zig Ziglar, who was a prominent speaker in the United States, and he had this philosophy that you can get anything you want in life so long as you help enough other people get what they want. And I believe that's a philosophy that makes a lot of sense for how you can lead your life in a positive way. There's another philosophy, and that's give me what I want and to hell with everybody else. That's a different way of looking at the world. I don't think that's as constructive as the world where we think about how we can contribute to one another's life in some positive way and in turn benefit from contributing. So that's the way I would say, if there's advice to give to other writers, that's the advice.
Yes. And stop procrastinating, people. If you have the passion of writing, write, and share your talents to the world. So, lastly, Mr. Andy, how do you balance writing with the other aspects of your life?
Well, I look at balance as like a wheel, and I look at someone who's unbalanced as a flat tire. And to balance your life, what you have to know is what are the values that you care about in your life. I suppose, generally speaking, we have some basic values, things like, like intellectual things, spiritual things, emotional things, things of that nature. But the values that you have to be uniquely your values. To give you an illustration of a value, for example, one day I was spending some time with my elderly Aunt Helen in Los Angeles, and we were making breakfast. And I reached down under the sink and pulled out a cast iron, a cast iron pot to make some breakfast. And she started yelling at me, no, don't touch that pot. That pot was very valuable to her. That was a value in the sense that, she wanted that for herself. She didn't want me to touch, that particular thing. But that's just like a very basic example of a value to her. So when you talk about values, we have to talk about values to who. So you have to single out what are your values. Now, if it's health, nutrition, if it's to be productive or whatever those values are, you can list them all. And you have to ask yourself, are you paying attention to all of them? An example of someone who did not pay attention to all his values is Van Gogh, the artist. He was spectacular in painting, but his life was a disaster. His brother had to look after him because he didn't look after himself in terms of his nutrition and his life where he lived and so on. Luckily for him, he had a brother. But he achieved something spectacular that very few of us will ever achieve with his paintings and his art. And my view on something like that is, for a time, you can go out of balance for the sake of achieving some great goal that you have. But you need to restore the balance eventually so that you lead a decent life and you have an enjoyable life. So those are a few comments about balance.
Very well said, Mr. Andy. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Yes, you can get them on Amazon. Just look up my name, Andy Semotiuk, or you can find them on myworkvisa.com. There's a list of all the books there, which is my website, my personal website. Or if they want to reach me, they can reach me at pacelawfirm.com. That's my law firm.
So, Mr. Andy, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a pleasure to be with you tonight.
And please support Mr. Andy, because if you support him, there's books to come. Bye for now.